Phrases like celebrity Christian, celebrity pastor, and celebrity Christianity are oxymorons. They're in opposition to one another. Because as Christians, we're called to be servants first. We're called to be Christ-like, like Jesus, who never really wanted crowds. And even when he had crowds, he would say some of the hardest things and disperse them. We're supposed to be Christ-like, like Jesus, who went out of his way to serve even the lowliest people or the lowest thought of people in society. You see, fame was never something that Jesus went after. Special treatment was never something that Jesus went after. Yet today, in modern Christian culture, all too often, we're after celebrity. We're after special status. And if we get honest, I think it's causing and has caused some major problems in modern Christianity, especially in the West and in America. So in today's podcast conversation, we're going to kick off a deeper conversation about just that. We're going to kick off a series that we're going to be doing intermittently throughout the end of the year about the church that celebrity built. And we're going to be looking here and there at different episodes about the impact of celebrity culture inside the church, on the church, and how people view Christianity. And in today's episode, the first piece of this Church That Celebrity Built series, we're actually going to look at the green room culture that has been created in churches. And hey, we're going to try to take a fair look at this. Everything about green rooms in churches, it's not bad. But also, there's a lot of stuff about the green room culture in churches that is causing a lot of issues. So we're going to try to take a deep look at that. We're going to talk about some mega church issues of the green room, but we're also going to talk about green room issues that can be found in really small churches. Because the truth is, green room culture has affected churches of all sizes and all kinds of theological backgrounds. Celebrity culture and a lot of the things that come from it, like green rooms, have affected more of Christianity than a lot of us would like to admit. So we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to talk about what steps we can take, what we can do to begin to leave some of the negative effects of green room culture behind. How can we navigate this where we take the best of green rooms and we take the best of what they were designed for, caring for volunteers, things like that, but leave behind the harmful and more insidious things that have worked their way into the church. So you may be watching and you may be getting your popcorn ready. You're like, oh my gosh, what are they going to expose about green rooms? Or you may be saying, Jeff, what in the world is a green room? And it really doesn't matter where you are at or how much you know about this subject. I think this conversation is going to bless you. And I think this is a conversation that we've got to have in the church. So if you're ready, let's dive in together to today's podcast conversation where we talk about the green room culture in the American church. All right, guys, welcome back to the Church Disrupted podcast with your host, Jeff Cochran. And today I'm joined around the table by co-host Leann Reece and Vicki May. Ladies, thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to talk about a topic that always gets people riled up today. Okay, this is people have significant feelings about this topic. But one thing is always true when I talk about this on social media. Regardless of whether your feeling's positive or negative, it's strong, and there is no middle ground, it seems like, on this topic. So hopefully today you can find a little bit of a middle ground, a little bit of empathy for the other side, no matter which side that you fall on. At the same time, hopefully we can see some questions that need to be asked about modern church celebrity culture. And here's the topic we're talking about today, all right? This is for every single person who's listening. We're going to be talking about celebrity culture and the effects, the negative effects of the green room mentality in churches, okay? And one of the reasons why I ask you two to be on this podcast episode is you two have been involved in worship across churches and organizations, like high-level worship, concert-style, excellent worship in a lot of different places. And Leann, you were part of worship in a church that we both came from, where a lot of hurt came from, but you've been a part of worship in multiple churches before, after, since. that are really just as big of productions, right?
Hmm.
Are you doing worship in your current church?
I'm doing like a small group setting of
Small
that,
group setting. Okay.
but with everything, I haven't jumped in yet. I'm still a little like, eh.
Yeah, I love my church, and I'm a little bit scared, a little bit. There's a little bit of trepidation about jumping back into serving because what if I see something behind the curtain that
Mhm.
makes me not see my church the same way, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of that, and it's a lot of those were my biggest communities when I was at other churches, and so it's the fear of, do I jump in and make that my biggest community at church again and then lose it again?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a real fear. So we weren't planning on jumping into that, but when you said that, I wanted to push just a little bit more because a lot of our listeners feel that.
Mhm.
On the community, we hear that kind of thing a lot. Like, hey, I'm checking out this church. I'm not sure about this church. I think I like this church, but I want to serve, but I'm scared to serve because with serving comes all of these other wounds, memories of these other wounds, these things that happen. Because if you've been involved in a church and you've been super involved in serving, your community was based on where you were serving, and then you got hurt or you went through spiritual abuse and had to leave that church, then the serving that you loved likely became a massive source of your pain. Okay. So what do we do? Like we've got, full disclosure, something you guys aren't going to see on the video right now. I mean, if you're listening on audio, you just got to picture this with us. But right in the middle of our table here, okay, we've actually got an orange shock collar remote. Okay, it's a training collar, not a shock collar, but it's a training collar
For
for the
Jeff.
podcast
No.
puppies. It's not for me.
It's if we get mad at you.
The
Yeah.
board might think that's a good idea sometimes, okay? But our listeners will probably love that too. I disagree with that one, Jeff, right? But we got it on the middle of the table just laying here, so it's out of the view.
Here he comes.
But the reason we got it is because, Rocket, our new podcast puppy, sometimes he just doesn't follow the rules. He'll like go over there, like tickle the guest or something like that, or, just want all of the petting. So if he gets out of line, you guys
We get to
have
push a button.
exactly, you bring correction. Okay.
I like
Now,
that.
here's the reason why that works, though. There's a reason why I'm talking about this. Some of y'all are just like, what in the world? Jeff just went way off the rails. He's talking about training collars and puppies. Because that dog has felt the shock and the vibration on this a few times, he knows he doesn't want that pain again. Okay.
Agreed.
And it is a light pain. It's a humane pain. We've worked with trainers and everything else as we were trying to figure all this out. But most of the time, all he gets is a couple of beeps. 3 high-pitched beeps are a real low vibration. And all that does is that says, whoa, I've experienced the pain that comes after this before. If I don't straighten up, I've got to stop this behavior or pain will come. Now, that's conditioning, okay? You think about Pavlov's dogs. If you're not familiar with Pavlov's dogs, look those up. That's like a heavy, anybody who's in psychology or, any field like that, any sort of mental health field, they're going to be paying attention to Pavlov's dogs, all right? Because conditioning works. Conditioning is a part of psychology in humans. It's also a part of psychology in dogs. And I remember when I first started talking to a trainer about this dog. Okay. And he was telling us all these things. My wife was sitting in the same room with us, and he's like, here's the thing you need to do. Here's what you need to do with the leash, all this stuff. It was all conditioning. And eventually he just looked at my wife and he said, I bet you know all of this stuff. And she said, oh, yeah, you're just basically telling me how to do psychology with the dog because he can't talk and I can't talk. We got to do nonverbal psychology, right? So conditioning can help affect us positively, but conditioning negatively can also really hurt us psychologically. And when it comes to serving, a lot of us have been conditioned negatively, right? When we go through hurt and we've been deep in serving, then when you go to serve again, there's the fear, but wait, last time I served, pain came after that. So if I serve this time, it's just like the beep on the collar. Is pain going to come after that in this new place, right? That's why it's so hard to step back into serving. There is the fear of, I don't want, because this isn't just physical pain. This isn't just a vibration or a shock. This was soul crushing pain. I carry soul wounds because of the spiritual abuse that I went through. I carry soul wounds because of the hurt. So if that makes sense, I just want our listeners to know this was not planned at all. But the reason why it is so hard to often step back into serving or step back into pieces of church that you once loved after spiritual abuse, it's because your body, your fight or flight or freeze, you're trying to protect yourself from the pain. And those are triggers that the last time I did this, great pain came. Now, I can tell you, we were talking about this before we hit record. We were just talking about different experiences at new churches. And I preached yesterday at our church. It's the first time I preached at a local church where I didn't travel for friends or something like that in a long time. That was a big step. So I can tell you it gets better. If you find a church you can trust, it gets better. But the fear doesn't go away until you've done it without pain for a while. So I just want to encourage people, if you're struggling to get back into serving, God is not in a hurry with your healing. Take it at your own pace. If other people are in a hurry with your own healing, okay, that's fine, but don't listen to them because it's your healing and God is not in a hurry with it. So when you're ready, step back in. And if you don't feel ready to step back into things like serving, even when you're trying a new church, that is okay. And when you do, just make sure that when you do that, hey, I can handle it if something starts going a little wrong here. But it's also okay to say, hey, if something starts going a little wrong, I'm going to pull back. Okay. And that's how I got back into serving. Leann, with doing worship and stuff, I was telling you guys about it. Our worship pastor, I said, hey, I'll serve, but I'll only serve once a month. And then I declined probably 2 or 3 months a year, which means I'm only serving about, 8, 9 times. And he was so gracious to say, I know you need to take it slow. Never feel bad about declining on planning center. It's my job to make sure that worship is taken care of. He said, but my bigger job is to pastor you guys. So your health is my priority. Never worry about hitting that decline button. And that's the only way that I could step back in. So be willing to step in slow, be willing to put up boundaries. And if it doesn't feel right, again, protect yourself. We are pro serving, we are pro church. But we hear from so many people that feel like something's almost wrong with them because it's taken so long. And we just want you to know that's okay. We have all been through it. In a lot of ways, we're still going through it in different parts of our journey. Okay. We're with you. And one of the most freeing thing for me was realizing that God is not in a hurry with my healing the same way that I am.
Mm.
I want to be healed completely and never have another church trigger. And God is fine if I have some church triggers for the rest of my life. God wants a relationship with me. All right. He's okay. Some things I think he's okay with church triggering us because they weren't his plan for church anyway. Right.
Agreed.
But we'll get into some of that. So today we're talking about celebrity culture and the green room mentality that has led to a lot of celebrity culture. Often before there's a celebrity pastor, there's a green room, and green rooms tend to lead to some bad places. Now, before we talk about anything else, some people have heard that and they're just like, that's not true. I'm a worship leader in my church. We have a green room and the green room is great. And they've got 18 reasons why the green room is great. And they're already arguing us. If that's you, just stay with us. Just listen to the conversation. We are not anti-green room. What we are saying is green rooms in more cases than not tend to lead to a place that you have to be very, very careful about. Okay. One of the things that we're starting to look at a lot in the podcast is not saying, hey, these red and yellow flags don't mean that a church is abusive. Okay. They don't mean that a church is bad. They mean there is fertile ground, fertile soil for abuse to grow. And we're taking a real hard line. Some people think, Jeff, you guys take too hard of a line on this stuff. And I would agree. I know we do. But the reason being is because the community that we're serving and protecting are people who have already been hurt and they can't afford to be hurt again by the church. Okay. So our hard lines, here's the reason why we take really hard lines, because we would rather stay away from even the potential for abuse. When we see fertile soil for it, we would rather say, hey, there's fertile soil here. Can we change the soil? And if not, then hey, this is probably not a safe place to be because of its potential, right? So if your church is using green rooms, we're not saying your church is bad. We're not saying that all green rooms are bad, but we're saying that green rooms can tend to, if not checked, lead to a mentality that provides fertile soil for spiritual abuse. And even if it doesn't go that far, deep, deep church hurt that I think is avoidable. So you two have done a lot of worship. You've been in a lot of green rooms. I've been in a lot of green rooms as a speaker, some in worship. I've put together, Leann, you've helped. We put together green rooms for people who commanded speaking fees that honestly make me wildly uncomfortable that we ever paid them, because
Well, certain types of water in room temperature, cold or hot things. And
Only the blue M&Ms.
yes.
Yeah. And so that when I say that stuff, people are like, y'all are just making that up. No, guys, I've got
mean-
the riders. Leann, you've seen the riders where we've had to go shop for
Yes.
these things.
Yeah. Well, it's like, well, we hear about this in the celebrity culture in general with musicians or who, any entertainment industry, actors, whatever. And so you would think this wouldn't apply to a church and pastors? Really?
Yep.
Yes.
But it does. A lot of these writers will say down to the brand name of the water, the type of fruit that I want. We're not joking when we say we want M&Ms, but only this specific color of M&Ms. Or this
Ridiculous.
yeah, it's and not all are that way. We've worked with I've worked with some people who are really big names who were incredibly humble. I've also worked with people at one point we were getting ready to pay someone almost $20,000 to come speak one session at a conference. Okay, and just peel back the curtain. Again, I don't feel comfortable about this. I was a part of this. So I think we just need to be honest about it. I don't feel comfortable that I was a part of it, but I know when you're putting on big events and stuff, it can almost feel like it makes sense. Let's get that big name that's going to draw. Everybody's only paying a little bit. Sometimes it's not even tithe money that's paying for it, right? Which I think is a big line draw. Let's not pay for these speakers with tithe money, although that happens a ton. Okay. But I remember having a speaker that was going to command like $20,000 for a 30-minute session. They're going to do 30 minutes, no more, no less. They wanted the last flight in because they were doing a main service that night. They wanted the last flight in, the first flight out, so they could be there as little time as possible. They were going to be driven there, let in through the back door when the service started. Right when the session started, they were going to stay in the green room with all of their stuff, not to be bothered. No one was supposed to come back and talk to them. They would go out, they would speak, then they would leave the green room and they would come back out. They would go out the back door. They'd either stay in a hotel or get the last flight out that night and get the first flight out in the morning, right? If they could get out that night, they would, right? Now, we were used to some of that, okay? But in this particular instance, this person, again, wanted $20,000, last flight in, first flight out before their session. Nobody was to talk to them. Their people wanted to make sure they knew that me as running the conference wasn't supposed to talk to them, or senior pastor wasn't supposed to talk to them. They don't want to talk to people, right? Not only that, but there's an expectation in those circles. And again, I got taught this by other people in these event circles. There's an expectation that beyond the honorarium, which is still what we're calling it when it's $20,000, that you give them a special gift. So like it could be custom Jordans or this, that, or the other. So it's something that is not going to show up on the income statement. So there's all those things, right? But then you don't meet them. You don't do any of that. And this was when I really started to see, okay, this is wild. This has gotten way out of control. I was struggling with some of those things, but trying to justify them. And I remember this headline speaker having their assistant email us like 4 days before the event and go, hey, he just got a better offer. They've invited him. Brian Houston, who was, a name that carried a lot of cachet at that point. Okay. Brian Houston invited him to go to Hillsong Conference. So he's going there instead. Because their contracts were completely friendly to them and not us. And that's the only way that you could get them. Right. So then he wanted to go run in that group, which I got. Hey, that was a big conference at the time. We didn't know what was going on at Hillsong with Brian Houston and everybody else. But that moment that I realized, I was like, this is not about preaching the gospel. None of this is is just about performance at this point. And that was when I was really awoken in that whole scenario to celebrity culture. So that's when it goes wild. Okay. At its beginning, it's just a good place for volunteers. So let's talk about this. What's the good you see for green rooms? Because you've been in a lot of good green rooms. What's the bad that you see in green rooms? And then what would you say, hey, if you're in a church as some green rooms there, what do we need to watch out for to make sure that it stays on the good side, not the bad side?
Right. Well, I feel like I'll start with the good. What is good about the green room? If you're in a backroom setting long enough with a certain group of people constantly, then you are building a community with those people, friendships, or at least a community of that you're serving together. And so then if you're serving consistently with each other, then, that's a good place to be. And so it gives you a place to like nurture that community and relationships. And
So that community almost comes like a small group of sorts.
Sure.
It can be a very healthy place.
Correct. It can be a very healthy place, and you can pray with each other. You can share things with each other. You can laugh. It's all those things. And so I think, to me, that's been good experiences that I've had in a green room serving.
I'll say something that's good is, our goal is to give our all in worship, right? We want to set the tone. We want to allow people to feel comfortable coming and worshiping. So we're trying
to create an atmosphere.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to, give all of that. And for me, it was always like I want somebody to be as excited about worship and coming to the feet of Jesus as I am. So I want to give my all in worship with everything that I have so that other people feel comfortable. Well, after you're doing that all weekend, it's exhausting, and so it also gives you that time of like, okay, let me reset. Let me get my heart, my mind back in the right place. Just a little bit of silence helps. Also, most churches I've been in that have had the green room, we've had great, amazing volunteers that have also fed us, and it fueled us because it was there, the whole time when we were able to get sustenance and kind of, refuel, get our sugar back up.
Because you're talking about being there for multiple services, being there for rehearsals. You may be there
hours.
You may be there for 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, depending on your church setup. So you're getting fed there, and you're having a place where you can go in between services where it's a little quieter than maybe the lobby.
Yeah. Yeah. And just getting a little bit of like peace and reset for a moment. That's always been really, really great. And the camaraderie that you get, like, because if you're there for 12 hours, 3 hours, whatever, you're with this group of people, And so the more that you're on the same level, the more you're connected, the more you can have fun together. It makes a great chemistry both on and off the stage, and that makes for a great team, to work together. And if things happen, hey, we're on the same page. We just sat and had fun together. We did, life together, all of that. And so that makes it really good too. It makes this family feel and helps with the chemistry on stage.
Yeah. Hey, Disruptors, I want to tell you about my friend Dustin Stepp and the East Tennessee Mentorship Association and how they can help you heal from religious trauma, spiritual abuse, or just become the best version of you. East Tennessee Mentorship Association is a veteran-owned mental health support and personal development organization that acknowledges the importance of your deeply held beliefs as a factor in their overall well-being. Through one-on-one mentorship sessions, culturally neutral small groups, workshops, outdoor activities, and more, they can contribute to your journey, offering battle-tested perspectives to help you move past your obstacles and toward your potential. If you want to change your life and you're ready to do your part of the work in a supportive environment, then call East Tennessee Mentorship Association today at 865-282-4403. That's 865-282-4403. Go ahead, give them a call, and tell them Church Disrupted sent you for a special rate. I'm telling you now, you won't regret it. And thank you to East Tennessee Mentorship Association for your support of the Church Disrupted podcast. So a lot of the good things, that's what I hear from a lot of people on social media when it's, oh man, like Jeff, we're with you until you talk about green rooms. And it's not just me. Natalie Runyon, who we had on the podcast, I don't know how many episodes ago when this one releases, but we had Natalie Runyon on toward the beginning of the summer with Raised to Stay. And I remember when she put up a post about, green rooms, it was probably 6 to 9 months ago now. But she just said, hey, if we're going to deconstruct stuff in the church, why don't we start with green rooms? And people lost their minds, right? So I've not just seen it with us in our post. I've seen it with Natalie and others like her in their post. And it's this rush to protect the green room that slowly turns into a very unfruitful conversation that doesn't look Christ-like at all, where they're just lobbing arrows at the people who are anti-green room, right? But when I hear the good things about the green room, That's what I normally hear. If people don't go off the rails, the good things I normally hear is, but hey, all green rooms aren't bad. Our green room, it provides a lot of community. We get a quiet place to go in between services to rest, to recharge. A lot of those words are used. We need a place to go eat food. We've already listened to the message. We don't need to listen to that message, 8 times. The preacher in me is like, well, it probably wouldn't hurt to listen to it 8 times, but that could be a form of spiritual abuse. It really depends on how that preacher's preaching that day. But those are all good things. Okay. Here's the question I ask though, because people think that I ignore those good things. I don't ignore those good things. So before we get into the bad things, I'm just going to give you this question and we'll come back to this. Okay. We'll come back to this, but I want you to think about it. When I talk to pastors, and I've done this even in the last couple of weeks, and they're talking about expanding services or how many services they need in a building, the way that we normally think about it, the way that church consultants normally tell you to do it is when you're 80% full in a room, start another service, right? Because if you're over 80% full, people don't feel comfortable coming in, start another service. We don't ask, do we have enough volunteers to start another service? We ask, hey, do we need more room for people to come? Then we'll start another service. Now, you all have also been around church long enough to know that all services are not created equal. Usually, if you create another service in a primetime slot, more people will probably come. But a lot of those services end up not bringing in very many people at all. They kind of move people off and make room that may never really backfill. Okay. So some services, and I hate to say this, but it almost feels like a waste when you're in the room because you've got volunteers leading this room of people that's almost empty that could fit in another service. So I'm a little slower to get pastors to encourage pastors to start services. But here's the question that I ask them. I don't ask them, hey, at what point when you're this full, you need to, start another service. I ask them if they have enough volunteers to take care of that service from that service if they start it. Most churches don't, right? So that becomes the issue when we're at one service, when a church is at one service. Think about a church plant. And maybe we'll just dive into this right here. When you're at a church plant, and you've got a brand new church, maybe it's 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 5-year-old, doesn't matter. As long as you have that one service, you do what you can do with the volunteers from that gathering. There's one service, one gathering, that's it, right? When we go to 2 services, what do we normally ask? We ask people to sit one and serve one. That is, again, not bad because that means if you're serving in like kids ministry or something like that, you can still go to church. Not bad, okay? When we move to 3 services, 4 services, 5 services, 6 services, 7 services, 8 services, 12 services over a weekend, and those are legitimate numbers, guys. Those are numbers I've seen a lot. We've experienced, 5, 6, 7 services in a weekend. Okay. When that happens, we tend to do the same thing. Okay. Well, we got here up to 2 services, but now it's no longer serve one, sit one. So what we're doing is we're asking the same volunteers to keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back. And you all know in worship, you don't normally serve one, sit one anyway. In certain positions, because you're in the room. So they think, oh, well, you can listen to the message. You're in there the whole time, right? So what I ask pastors to do is I say, hey, do you have enough volunteers to treat this next service like you did your first service? You got enough volunteers to run it all by itself? The reason why I ask that is because even with serve one, sit one, you need that. Because if people are serving in multiple services, then you got an issue. They're still not sitting. They're still not getting to experience the church service, right? And most pastors say no. And what I'll tell them is if you're so full that you can't fit any new people in, that you need a new service, but you don't have enough volunteers to essentially staff that service and make that service run, then you haven't discipled people well enough to grow anymore. And your cap to growth is not that you're 80% full in the room. Your cap to growth is you haven't discipled enough people to lean into their gifts. Either that or God hasn't sent you the people with the gifts you need. And if God hasn't sent the people that you need with the gifts that you need to your gathering to start another service, then to me, that means that God is probably not telling you to start another service yet, because God will send you what you need, right? And we're so uncomfortable with sitting and saying, God may want us to sit in this place and stay in this place for a little while, right? We're so uncomfortable with that we immediately move to these other services and then we start burning people out. And the green room is an answer to burn people out slower, in my opinion. So again, even though there's good reasons for a green room, there's good things to it. I always ask, at the root of the problem, couldn't we have avoided the need for the green room in the first place, where people serve in one service and then they move on, right?
Right. Well, even to the point of there's been times where I've served and you have multiple services. And then I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but when you are exhausted from serving and you've maybe served several weekends in a row and you're told that you need to get out of the green room and go walk the lobby and make a presence and talk to people. Again, not a bad thing. But then where is those lines and times of like where I can reset and recoup and relax? Like I am on all the time. I mean, I'm a teacher. I live this life. You're on all day long. You have to be multiple things and you have to make multiple decisions all day long. And it's go, 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 go. And I'm a person who needs my downtime to be able to show back up the next day and do it all over again.
And if you're doing, let's say you're doing 5 services, but one of them was on Saturday or 2 of them were on Saturday and the rest were on Sunday. Well, now where's your downtime? 'Cause
Right.
you work
Where's
all
your downtime? So where's the balance in that? Because again, I think it's good to, if I get out of their green room and I'm talking to people in the lobby, then you're removing that celebrity status because we are on a platform. We are on a stage. We are singing. People are looking at us and singing with us, right? So I get that. I think that's a great thing. We are not celebrities. We are not unattainable. We are not some, special person. I'm just here leading worship with you,
And if you're out in the lobby afterwards, hey, I just saw that person on
Right.
stage. Now they're out in the lobby.
and they're approachable. I can
Yeah.
go talk to them and absolutely. And so those things are all good. But if you are worn out from serving, that's not good.
So, but let's go
So,
back
like,
to the
where's the
root of the
balance?
issue.
So that's what
right?
I'm saying. So where's the
I
balance?
think the balance goes back again to that root. If you're dealing with green rooms, it's always a fight to not get out of balance because green rooms are good if you stay in balance. Okay. They can serve a good purpose. But we've all seen green rooms are like magnetized toward the chaos of imbalance. Okay. Where we stay in them. We've all heard the term green room dwellers. Okay. That is it's a term within church leadership because there are a lot of green room dwellers. They never get out of the green rooms, right? Now, I, as a church staff member at a very large church, would do 4 or 5 services a weekend, and I would be in the lobby after every service. So I would do like the closing and then run to the lobby to meet people because I wanted them to know I was approachable. But that was my job. That was my 40-hour-a-week job. I was getting paid for that. That's different than the volunteer. So
Absolutely.
here's where I would say the balance is. The balance happens before the green room. The balance happens again of you don't need to worry about the green room and not being approachable if you served one and set one. Or if you served one and because you're in worship, you're able to set that one as well and then you left. The problem becomes when we're doing 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 services in one weekend, right? Because again, let's treat it like a church. If it's an individual, single site, single service church, you have to have enough people from that gathering to serve, right? But the bigger churches get, and I'm just going to pull back the curtain a little bit here. This is not just from my experience in churches, but it's also church consulting experience. The larger a church gets, the leaner they run on staff, which means the less staff members they have per attender, which means the more volunteers they need. And the bigger you get as a church, the more services that you run, which means the more volunteers that you need. But because you're already running, as you grow, right? As you grow, you're running leaner in staff. That's going down. So your need for volunteers is growing. Your need for volunteers is also growing because of the services as well. So your need for volunteers exponentially grows beyond your volunteer base, people who are ready. And we do that. Why? We do that because the leaner we run and the more we run off volunteers, the more duplicatable, the more replicable it is. And we can start new sites and new campuses and all of this, which sounds really good from a systems perspective. Okay. From like a church consulting perspective, sounds really good from the CEO pastor perspective. Okay. What it doesn't take into account though, is that there will never be from that point on enough volunteers to take care and shoulder the load, which means you will be putting more on the same people from that point out, right? And that's why the larger churches get usually the shorter the life cycle of a volunteer, which means a volunteer may be running on average, I'm at this church and volunteering and active for about 3 years before I either stop volunteering completely and just show up, or I leave and go to another church. And you all have seen that as well. You've seen this volunteer cycle. It gets really thin. You've been a part of the volunteer cycle where you're burning out, because we're not just asking people to do that in one ministry. Often we're asking them to do it in multiple ministries. So when we look at it, there's a systemic reason why we're burning people out and needing green rooms. When we go back to the root and say, do we have enough volunteers to extend this gathering to another service? And if not, we can let people know, hey, we would like to do another service so everyone can serve one and sit one. But here is where we're short on volunteers. So as soon as we have gifted people who feel called to do that in our midst, we'll do this. And until then, we're going to do the best we can with one service. Let your people decide when you're ready. Let the Lord decide when you're ready when he sends you people who are gifted and willing, if that makes sense. So yes, if you wait until you're doing 5-8 services, then yeah, you're going to be burnt out, and you're going to be the only option is to be a green room dweller most of the time, because you're completely burnt out and every bit of free time you have is spent at that church, right? But if we handle it beforehand, imagine how life-giving it would have been if all those years you were just serving one service throughout the weekend. That's a totally different ballgame. So does that make sense?
It does make sense. But it also, while you were talking about that, it made me think about a negative side to the green room that is still related to this. So the thing that I said was positive was building a community amongst you, or relationships, or, because you're serving. And I said, but if it's consistently happening. In my experiences, I was a global server, which meant I had to travel to multiple campuses.
So that would probably make more sense as central, like, you're being sent out from central, doing
from my main campus to other campuses, right? Which I enjoyed a lot of times, but it got to a point where I brought this up multiple times, that it's hard for someone who is a global volunteer because you feel disconnected. You are constantly feeling disconnected because you are constantly at some other campus. And each campus has its main attenders and staff, and they have built a community. And then you're sitting in their green room. You feel like it's not your green room, it's their green room. And you're just a temporary guest. And while it's not unwelcoming, it's distant, if that makes sense. It's like I'm on the surface serving with you, and I know you, but yet I don't really know you. And so you never get to fully develop those relationships with each other. And so that's why I brought this up multiple times, because I was like, you feel left out, you feel adrift. And so the green room actually is uncomfortable a lot of times, at least for me.
Give you that room to take it in a good way and use it as the rest and recoup place that you might need, because you feel so uncomfortable. And even though it's we're one big church with several campuses, you feel that disconnect because they're a family over here, and you're just kind of butting in for a little bit. And then you're gonna be gone.
I feel like a hired singer, but yet I'm not getting paid. I mean, I'm just going to be saying. Yeah, so I'm just going to say it. I serve because I want to. I want to serve my church. I want to serve my Lord. But it's like at the same time, I'm lost, a little adrift here. I'm losing community.
Let's talk about that. So there's a couple of things there, but there's one big thing I want to hit.
Okay, great.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room of I feel like a paid musician, except I'm not getting paid. Right now, a couple of things I want to hit first, though. A green room can be great community for one person, and it can be a suck on community and make another person feel like they're not belonging. Now, part of it just depends on the environment around it, what's happening. Do I get to stay and build community at this campus or location, right? The other thing that I wanted to say, though, we're using words like campus location, central, big church. We're talking about a lot of that because that's our experience. Green rooms do not just happen in big churches. Green rooms happen. I've seen green rooms happen in churches with 200 people because they have 2 services. I've seen churches build green rooms with 1 service simply because every big church they go to that does well has a green room. So they feel like, well, this is a part of it. They take care of their volunteers. So now we need a green room. If you're a church that has 2 services, you do not need a green room. Okay, I don't care what denomination you are. I don't care what excuse you have. If you got 2 services, you don't need a green room, right? There's way more bad that's going to come from it than good. Y'all may not even agree. I'm going to say that. That's one of those hard lines where people are going to say, Jeff, you're drawing too hard of a line. And I would say, why would we not draw the line on the other side of letting the soil get fertile for abuse? Right. So I used to tell, students when I was a student pastor, I said, if you ask where is the line where this becomes sin, you're almost always going to fall over it because we like to get right up to the line. Okay. So let's set the line of my behavior far away from sin. So I don't ask, when does my behavior become cheating on my wife? Is it cheating on my wife when I'm sending text messages or DMs to another woman that are a little flirty? Is it only cheating on my wife when I have sex with another woman? Like where is this line?
Right.
Okay. Well, for me, the line is far away from even the appearance of talking. Like I don't talk to many women alone. On a regular basis, DM or in public. If I don't know them well, I'm not talking to them alone for extended periods of time or long DM conversations because the appearance of it, right? When I'm meeting, I meet with women alone a lot for business and stuff like that because the Billy Graham rule caused a lot of women to not have opportunities over the years because men in power wouldn't meet with them. So no, I meet with women all the time. But if I am meeting with someone, I'm telling my wife where I'm at. She's got my location, right? She's got the password to my phone. She's got all that stuff because I have nothing to hide, right? Because for me, that's not for everybody, but for me, that's putting that line way back there. We should definitely do that with spiritual abuse because my sin, if I was to cheat on my wife, that affects me. It affects my wife. It affects our kids. Okay. That's about where it stops with personal effect. Would it affect our friends some? Yes. But it's not like it affects hundreds and thousands of people, right? It affects hundreds and thousands of people when we just start letting abuse grow in our churches in a place where people would feel safe, right? So I do want to say that hard line, if you only have 2 services, I don't think you need a green room. But here's where I was getting at with that. Small churches do have green rooms. Small churches get into green room mentalities. Small churches can get into celebrity mentality and celebrity culture. They generally call it honor. We don't call it celebrity. We call it honor. Okay. But that happens. So if you're listening and you're going, hey, I need to just check out from this episode because this is one of those mega church episodes, which I've heard people, sometimes they're like, hey, I don't listen to all the mega church episodes, which is fair. Every episode we record is not for everybody. But this is not a mega church episode. We're going to use a lot of those examples because that's our experience. But I've seen this in small churches and celebrity in the modern Western church culture. Celebrity pulls at us everywhere we go, no matter how big or how small you are. Okay, but I want to get back to the big one. You said, when I'm working this hard, because you're not only doing, let's say you're doing 5 services, okay, but you also had to come to rehearsals across 2 days, okay, and you had to learn your parts because excellence is expected because we are excellent for the Lord. We have a spirit of excellence. All that means is you can't make a mistake. Right? You got people coaching you in your in-ears when you make a mistake. Everything is down to the T. Everything is tracked out. It's got to be right. Like I've been in those environments. That's not every church, but I've been in those environments. When you're doing that and you're saying, you know what, I'm spending 15 to 20 hours minimum this week at the church or preparing for this gig. Let's call it what it is. Okay. That's a part-time job. And we tell people all the time, this is kind of my rule. Again, hard line in the sand. People don't like it. I think if you are serving more than 5 hours at your church inside the walls or preparing to serve inside the walls at your church, if it's taking you more than 5 hours on average a week, it's too much. Okay? Because we should be spending more of our time outside with people in the community, being the church, than serving inside the church. Not to mention 5 hours and less feels like volunteering. I'm talking weekly. So that's like, 20 hours a month. That feels like volunteering. When you get to 8 hours and 10 hours and 15 hours and 20 hours, that's a part-time job. I got kids. They work part-time jobs. I've worked part-time jobs. That's a part-time job. Working a part-time job right now because SAI is not fully funded. Okay. That's a part-time job. And when we don't delineate that and we give all of this time when we're essentially working a part-time job for free, that's to me when celebrity culture leads to volunteer exploitation.
It's called gaslighting a little bit. Like you,
I wouldn't call it
well,
gaslighting.
in a sense of, I am going to be treated a special way. and given the impression that this is all okay, that we are completely using you.
It's definitely, I
mean,
wouldn't call it
saying?
gaslighting, but I would say it's very manipulative.
Manipulative.
This is for the
Okay,
Lord.
then if that's the better word for it, sure, absolutely.
So this is for the Lord. It is good. The Lord is going to be your rest. So how do we have churches that will say, let's just think about this. How do we have churches that will say, I want you to work the equivalent of a part-time job? And when I say 15 to 20 hours a week, a lot of times people think I've said 30 hours a week before. All of those are valid. And people always say, when I say something, 15, 20, 30, if it's over 15, they say, that's crazy. Nobody volunteers that much. I've seen you both volunteer that much for years. I've volunteered that much, right? So this is real. When we say this, guys, sometimes people think we're making stuff up and using hyperbole for clicks. We don't care about your clicks. I love you. We're so grateful that you watch. We care about you. We don't care about the clicks, right? So we're not saying this stuff for clicks. We're saying this because I've seen it affect you too. So when you're working this basically part-time job, okay, and you're having to work it on a Saturday and a Sunday for these services after you've worked, yourself to the bone in your, regular job,
or if
you
it's
had
holidays, you're working Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
So sometimes you're working your part-time job at the church that becomes a full-time job on top of your.
And also on Tuesday, because you're training the people that are coming up to help serve with you.
So for people who don't know what you're talking about, Vicki's talking about I've got during Easter, for instance, I've got my full-time job. And as soon as I leave my full-time job, I go to a church that already has a meal prepared for me because I'm serving for services Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of that week. Yeah. Tuesday, preparing whatever, right?
Sometimes there's meals.
Yes. So
depends on the campus.
So what you run into is you're running into this whole situation where I'm basically working somewhere between a part-time and a full-time job for free, okay? I'm working on Saturdays and Sundays. So let me ask you this question. In that situation, which is fairly normal, okay, in large churches, large and mega churches, it's becoming more and more normal in churches with 2 or 3 services because one of them may be on Saturday, right? Or maybe we do our rehearsals on Saturdays and then we do our 3 services on Sundays. In that situation, when are you supposed to Sabbath?
I don't know.
Okay, because Sabbath is not, something that you get to choose. Sabbath is expected, right? Sabbath is expected from us. It's where we rest. Well, you got a lot of people, a lot of Christians, especially professional Christians, when they need people to work and not Sabbath, they'll say things like this. They'll say, well, Jesus is our rest. Okay, they got a couple of scriptures they'll use. Yes, Jesus is our spiritual rest. Sabbath was not just about the spirit. Right? Sabbath was for us. Jesus said, Sabbath isn't for me. God said, Sabbath isn't for me. Sabbath is for you. Your body needs that rest, right? So we become disobedient to God by not Sabbathing in order to serve. But why? It's the same thing that they've told us. You're doing this unto the Lord. We know that it's tiring. Jesus will be your rest. And then when you disappear because Jesus was your rest, but you still needed physical rest, and when you said, Jesus be my rest, and you said, I gave you the Sabbath for a reason, right? When you burn out and you leave, nobody's checking on you after you decline 3 times. Heck, after you decline 3 times on Planning Center, you got to go to a special class again where you show them you understand Planning Center, because if you decline 3 times, something's wrong with you. Why are y'all reacting that way? Because you've been at a church where there was a class if you declined 3 times, correct?
And not only that, just going back to the burnout in general. So the church, that me and Vicki experienced a lot of this stuff out together. We not only served together, we taught together. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up taking a job there as well. So Monday through Friday, I was at the church working my 40-hour job there, right? Which wasn't 40 hours, let's be honest, more like 100. But
because it's always told you that when you get a job in ministry, that ministry is not a job, it's a calling, which I would agree with.
Well, they say that about teachers too.
But ministry is a calling, and throughout much of church history was never a job. It was just a calling. So when we make it a job, we got to treat it like a job, which means it needs limits. So you can't just say, hey, your salary, we're paying you for 40 hours, but we expect 60 to 65 because it's a calling. Mm-hmm. Okay, yes. That's exploitation. Mm-hmm. That's abuse. And that's not the way that Jesus treated people.
No. Well, and then, my job was outside of worship ministry. So it wasn't even in worship ministry. But then Tuesday nights, which half the time me and Vicki were always there training, which we loved. We loved getting to connect with new volunteers and make them feel welcome and help them. But it was okay, I was doing my job all day at the church. And then, well, I have to be here in like 2 hours. I might as well just stay. So then I have training for another couple hours.
So for
then
volunteer training, you were spending
yes,
2 to 3
that
hours
was
there
not
every
part of
Tuesday.
my paid job. I wasn't getting paid overtime. I wasn't getting paid anything extra. So I'm staying there and I'm volunteering for another few hours. So I'm there 14 hours maybe that day. And then if I'm also serving the weekend, well, I've worked the church Monday through Friday, stayed late on Tuesday, stayed late on Wednesday because that was part of my job.
Mhm.
Um,
Because you had to serve in the ministry on Wednesday nights that you were part
yes.
of. You didn't get to not come in during the day on Wednesday,
No.
but you had to serve Wednesday night too, so you may be there till 10 o'clock.
Yeah, so 2 nights in a row, I'm there 14, 15 hours, And then the weekend, if I'm serving, well, then I'm there all weekend. So where is that time for me and God?
Especially when your Sunday services, usually a lot of churches have Saturday services. A lot of those same churches have Sunday night services. So really, there's only breaks to eat that whole weekend. And some people may be saying, well, why'd you serve that much? Okay, so let's again peek behind the curtain a little bit. And this is not just mega churches, but most churches are going to require their staff members to serve somewhere. Okay. Now, I was always kind of told, here's what I was told. I'm not against church staff. I'm not against people being paid. Although I think the best thing that would happen, and I've said this, I think you've heard me say this, Leann, recently. I said this to multiple people yesterday at church, and I love being at a church where I can say stuff like this and people don't lose their minds. I'd be kicked out of a lot of churches for this. But I've literally said, I think the best thing that could happen to the Western church, especially the American church, is if we lost our buildings and all the pastors lost their paycheck overnight. Because I'm not against pastors being paid, but most pastors, if you told them you're not going to get paid for the next year, and if you stay for a year unpaid, then maybe you can get paid again, most of them would quit. And it would reset and show us who's in this because they're called to it, right? And not who's in it for money, okay? But if we remove the building, a lot of people don't know how to do church when church was done without a building for centuries, okay? And the church is growing. Let's just think about this. The church is growing most exponentially, like miraculously, in countries where there are no church buildings, and it's illegal a lot of times for people to meet in church buildings because it's growing in houses, right? So again, I'm not against church buildings. I like to meet indoors. I'm not against church building. I'm not against church staff. I've been church staff, right? But when we get church staff, I was always taught we have church staff, and so I was taught this when I stepped onto my first church staff, and I don't hear this a lot anymore. We're not paying you to do ministry. Okay. I still remember this pastor telling me this. We are not paying you to do ministry. When you start getting this paycheck in a couple of weeks, this paycheck is simply so that you don't have to work another job because you're devoting so much time to ministry.
Because you have to eat
Yeah.
and pay your
He said,
bills
you have to
and
eat,
take
you
care
have
of
to
your
pay your
family.
bills, you have to take care of your family. And right now you're devoting so much time to ministry that can't happen. And we see it as godly ministry. Like God has a special call in your life to do this ministry. So we're doing this so that one, you've got that time for family and stuff like that. We're going to put boundaries there. The other reason why we're paying you is because we want you to be available. So, like, hey, if someone's dying in the hospital midday, you're not available if you're working a job. But because you're not working a job, you can go be with that family in the hospital and you can sit with them as they're taking their last breaths. And I remember this pastor telling me when you're sitting there with someone taking their last breaths and you watch a person die and you are with their family, comforting them and being a pastor, you're going to wish you were doing anything else in that moment. And you're getting the paycheck not to do that. You're getting the paycheck so that you're available to do that and you're not doing something else, right? Now we treat it differently. So big churches, small churches, the expectation at most churches I've seen, okay, is that if you're on staff, you also serve. Okay, so think about this. Now, because you were a staff member, Leann, and you were extra bought in and did all the things, they wanted both of you because you did that. Vicki, you were the same way. They wanted you to train new volunteers. Okay, well, you couldn't serve as just a volunteer trainer for worship. You could only do that if you were already serving all the weekends, okay, and all the special events, and you were hardly ever hitting decline when you were asked to serve. So if you said yes all the time and you served all the time and you served wherever they asked, then you could do the training and your reward was an extra 3-hour night away from your family. You didn't get somebody to cover a couple of services for you or anything like that. And again, Leann, you worked a full 40 hours, yet you were expected to also serve the night in the ministry. And what was the reason? It's, well, all these other volunteers have full-time jobs and they're serving, right? But if I just serve there, then I'm going to get fired or reprimanded because I'm expected to serve somewhere else. And I'm expected to be in a small group because we're setting the example. All those things are good. The problem becomes now you're asked, let's legitimately go through this, okay? We'll go through, Leann's, yours is a little bit different, but Vicki, you had a full-time job as well. And you were working as much, if not more than Leann was, because we know teachers are taking a lot of stuff home, okay? Now, you're both working full-time jobs. You're asked to serve on all the services, Vicki, and then come back and train. Leann, you, before you could even do any of that, you had to finish doing your job, which was the unpaid hours on a Wednesday night, which was about 5, I would say probably 5 to 9.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's look at about 4 hours unpaid right there that you have to be there and you are working, but it's unpaid. And if anybody says anything, let's go, well, it's salary, so you're technically being paid. No, you're not. Okay. Right. So you're working 4 hours unpaid there. It's a night away from your family. Okay. The night before, you're serving, how long did you have to be there for volunteer training?
About the same amount. Well, not four, about 3.
About 3 hours?
2.5, 3 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're there 7 hours. Okay. You're there 7 hours outside of your job, volunteering all extra. Okay. To do the things that, people are telling you need to do. So one, you have to do to keep your job. Okay. Now, the extra, the volunteer training, you would just be looked down on if you didn't do that. And especially as a staff member, you don't want to be looked down on, okay? But let's think, in order to do that and in order to keep your job, Leann, you had to serve somewhere else. And since worship's where you're gifted, you were serving on the weekends, you were serving an average of 5 services, correct? Okay. Those 5 services had breaks in between them. So we're looking at about 6.5 hours worth of service time. And right in between service time, because turning parking lots around and all that. How long was your rehearsals and run-throughs before the first services started?
Hour and a half, 2 hours.
So yeah, let's say we had a service at
8:30.
5 on a Saturday. We usually had to be there like at 2.
Okay, so 3 hours. Okay, so you're looking at 6.5 hours plus 3 hours. That's 9.5 hours plus the 4 that you were working. So we're looking at 14.5 hours just to keep your job that you're not getting paid for, plus the 3. So you were working 17.5 unpaid hours a week, right? You were exhausted and in green rooms for that reason. You were gone Saturday night, Sunday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night from your family. 4 nights a week you were at the church away from your family, right? And again, had to do that to keep your job. The only difference, Vicki, for you is you didn't have to do it to keep your job and you didn't have to do the Wednesday night thing. So you got a few hours back. You were still serving 14, 15 hours a week.
Correct, and having a day job and no time for my family.
Exactly.
It's the same.
And spending those same nights away, right? You were spending 3 instead of 4. Now, so
traveling to different campuses, not getting reimbursed for gas.
So a lot of times you were actually doing more hours because you maybe
had to travel.
You had to travel, right? So as far as on the Sunday thing, right? So you really probably were serving about the same regardless of the Wednesday night ministry that you were in. Okay. That's a lot of hours. Okay. And it's a lot of hours of you can't do any of these special things or you can't do all of that. Most of it you have to do to be able to serve in that place, to be able to use that gift. Okay. And then Leann, for you had to do it to keep your job. Okay. Let's add a new wrinkle into this. Okay. That is volunteer exploitation, but it's look at all the good you're doing. And we're going to try to treat you like a celebrity when you're here because everybody knows you. And when you're out, people know you and you're on all the videos and stuff that we do. And we're going to treat you nice in the green room. And it feels good. Okay. And after, big events, let's look at all the people who were saved. You were a part of that, right? And it's, yes, you were a part of it, but Jesus gets all the credit. So what are we doing? I was there.
Right.
Jesus gets the credit for salvation.
Yep.
Okay.
Amen. Yes.
I wasn't a part of it. I was there. Right. No one was anyway, that's my own kind of pet peeve. But let's just say all that is there. There's volunteer exploitation going on. But a lot of the reason why you do the volunteer exploitation is because of all the manipulations being pumped up and the good it feels from being a celebrity, right? A celebrity-like person. We don't go after that, but let's be honest, it feels good. People treat
Well,
you
I
different.
mean, I don't know about you, Vicki, but I mean, there's so many times where just from doing worship, just doing, the things that God has given us the giftings in, and we're trying to use it to further his kingdom. But yeah, it's like we would be in different places or something, or like my kids' school, they go to a private Christian school. And it's always the like, hey, I know you from somewhere.
Where do I know you from?
Yeah, where do I know you
Singer.
from? Well,
I'm going to bleep that out. I said the name of a specific church. I'm going to bleep that out.
well, it was a, oh wait, don't you go to this church? Don't you sing at this church? I've seen you on the videos, on the screens, things like
Mhm.
that.
That's
And
where I know you from.
Yeah, and
Don't you sing it? Blah, blah, blah.
And
Yeah.
of course, there are times where you're like, oh, well, yeah, that's kind of cool, right?
Right, sure.
But also, it's that added pressure of
Being.
okay, even outside of the four walls of that building,
be
I have to
on.
be on.
Yep.
I have to be like,
I can't make a mistake. I have
Yeah.
to be.
I mean,
Now
sometimes
people are recognizing me, so now I have to be really careful how I act everywhere I go because
have to-
I represent the church.
I have to be careful how I act. I have to be dressed and presentable
Ah,
and, an ambassador of this certain building, not even the capital C church, but this building, these pastors,
mhm,
everywhere I go.
mhm.
It's exhausting.
It is exhausting.
Yeah. And
I mean,
the weight of that
it's a
far
lot.
outweighs the thing of, oh, people know me. Oh, wow.
And it's really cool at the beginning. Then it becomes a weight, but it's a holy weight because there are going to be
Sure.
people who are listening
I
and
mean,
they're
I think
like,
there is some things about accountability. I mean, I shouldn't be
Mhm.
out partying every
we're
weekend
very
and then
pro
Yes.
accountability.
you
in
know,
church.
worshiping on the stage, and I'm living a contradicting life. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Life.
Mhm.
That's that. Of course, having some accountability and responsibility in that, of course,
100%.
Yeah.
is appropriate.
Mhm.
But it does.
course.
It could get to a place where it becomes a burden.
Well, so we talk about accountability a lot on this podcast, and that's not just for like church staff and church leaders. That's for all of us as we represent the church. So I'm thinking, there's probably going to be people who are listening and they're like, "Oh, that sounds like, of course, we should represent whether you're on staff or not, celebrity or not. We should represent the church well everywhere we go." And yes, we should.
Mhm.
There's a difference though, in that weight almost keeps you. First of all, that weight keeps you in the manipulation and exploitation. Because I've got this whole heavy thing for God. Well, what if I quit or walk away? And then people are like, but I know you were at that church. What happened? Right. So then there's this, how many people would I be letting down? And just think about the language, 200 people were saved this weekend. 500 people were baptized and you were a part of it. Again, is that language bad? No. Why do I push back against it though? Jesus is the only one who has a part in our salvation.
Yeah.
The reason why I push back against it is because if you were a part of those people being saved, well, then if you quit and you walk away, not only could people not be saved because of you, especially when they find out that you used to be at that church and they ask you about it and now you're not.
And the impression is that you left on your own. It was your choice. Maybe it wasn't.
Yeah. And it's
you
not.
don't know my side of the story unless you ask me.
And we talked about that a lot on the podcast. There's a lot of times where people are kind of forced out for different reasons. And it's not sin. It's not anything like that. But here's the other thing. And again, we're very pro, yes, we should represent the church everywhere we go.
Mhm.
But representing the church, the ecclesia, representing the church just means I'm fruitful wherever I go. Right? So I'm working my
And
part-time
loving.
job.
We need to be loving people.
Yes. So
Open.
I'm working my part-time job, making ends meet because SAI is not fully funded, but it takes so much time that I can't fully run the businesses that I was running, right? So I'm a delivery driver a couple of days a week, for one of the big delivery companies, right? So I'm taking a couple of big packages to a customer's door last week, and they basically made me move where I was taking these packages and backing up the truck like 4 times. It was ridiculously heavy. And before I left, they're just like, you are the nicest person that I've ever met. Like, I would be furious if I were you, the way that I've treated you here. And she said, you've just been so fruitful. You've got to be a Christian. That was what she said. She said, you've got to be a Christian because you're so patient and you're so peaceful and you're so loving and you just give a smile no matter what I'm asking you to do. And that for me, that's a picture. And I'm not tooting my own horn. This is an example. I said, what else could I do?
Right.
Right? I'm just grateful to be able to help. Now, did I want to do those things? No, but that's what it looks like to represent the church everywhere that you go. There's a big difference in that. And this person's going, I recognize you. Where do I know you from? Knowing they're going to figure it out.
Oh, I see that cool bumper sticker on the back
and
of
then
your
Having to
car.
go above and beyond, right? Feeling like you can't go to, the store in sweats, or you can't have just a tired face anywhere that you go.
Yeah.
There's a big difference in those things. So we are very much so pro, yes, we represent the ecclesia everywhere we go. We represent Jesus everywhere we go. That's different than representing the brand of being on.
Yeah.
And for years, I had to be on everywhere that I went. And now, you brought up a really good example, Leann, because I was on stage, and you remember this because of being a staff member and stuff. I was on stage at one of the largest campuses of the church that we were at every single weekend. So much so that people thought like I led that campus. Okay. I was one of the faces of this church. I was at a thing last night at my current church with someone who never knew that I was a part of that church. And they kept saying, I know you from somewhere. It's just going to keep bothering me. Where do I know you from? I know you from somewhere. And another person who was in the room who was a part of that church just kept kind of giving me the side eye and not saying anything. And I said something about making a delivery, the part-time job. And the person goes, are you an Uber driver? Have you been my Uber driver? I hope I wasn't mean to you. And I was like, no, I'm not an Uber driver.
I hope I wasn't mean to you.
So I finally just looked, I looked at her, I looked at the other person, and I said, well, I was one of the pastors at this church.
Yeah.
And, they were like, I only went there like 3 times. Surely that wasn't it. And I said, I was on stage every weekend. And she said, oh, that is it. That's exactly where I know you from. I haven't been a part of that church in years. Okay. So if I still feel the weight of it at times, right? You still feel the weight of it at times. Think about the weight you feel in that moment, right? That weight leads to celebrity type culture, celebrity type thinking, celebrity type actions, because we just want to kind of disengage. We want to put on a fake face and disengage. But let's get back to, I said we're getting into this. There's so many layers to that comment you made. I feel like a paid musician, but I'm not being paid.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We were on that. Yeah.
I want to hit the big elephant in the room. So keep that thought where you're wanting to go.
Okay.
A lot of people who haven't been inside the inner workings of church don't know this happens. And again, this happens at small churches, medium-sized churches, and large churches. It's just a matter of if they allocate their budget for it. This is not only a mega church thing, I promise you. And every church that does this is not bad. I've been to good churches that do this. I just think it's a slippery slope. And I think if we're going to draw the safe line, we draw the safe line and jump back. I have churches that I love who disagree with me on this. Okay. But part of the reason why it feels like you're an unpaid professional musician who's not getting paid is because let's say there's 12 of you in the room, 4 of them are getting paid and aren't even Christians.
Yes.
They're getting paid because they needed a quality professional musician.
Yes. I know that. And so that was inconsistency for me. I'm like, so you're going to pay them, but you're not going to pay the rest of us.
But they will manipulate the heck out of you to be there.
Oh, of course.
To feel that weight of what happens if I say no, they're not going to like me.
If I say no, I'm letting God down.
Right.
I'm losing my community. They're not going to like me. If that person says no, they'll just pay someone to get in their place. Right. And it's not that you wanted to get paid. But
not necessarily, but over time I was thinking, I actually do this on a semi-professional level, and it would be nice to be treated that way.
Especially if I'm doing it 15 to 20 hours on a normal week.
On a normal week, right, and consistently. And you're asking me, I'm good enough to train people. I'm good enough to train people to do this. So that seems like you have confidence in what I'm doing. Where is the appropriateness of all of that? And so,
Well, I think part of it was different for you too, though, because like you and Leann are coming at that from a different place. Because again, you are a semi-professional
I sing in
musician.
other
Mhm.
in
Other
other
venues.
environments. Of course, that gets criticized too, but that's a
Yeah.
whole nother conversation. But
Yeah, because there's times where they want you to take away from an environment where you could make some money, so that you can
I
volunteer at
actually
the
am
church where you're
making
not going
money.
to make money.
Correct.
Right.
And you feel like it's not appropriate too, because I mean, I'm just going to be honest. I sing in cover bands and we play in bars, and that could be looked at as a conflict of interest. But really, in all honesty, I don't agree with that, because I'm in a place where there's real people that I might make a connection with, even singing secular music. Okay.
Yeah.
There are times in between when I have breaks that I talk to people, and guess what? I've talked about Jesus in a bar.
Mhm.
I feel more capable of reaching the unchurched because I am in those environments. But recently I've heard that there was a pastor say that he was glad that there were people on his worship team that didn't serve in bars on the weekends and then come serve on the church.
Mhm.
Well,
And that's a whole separate topic, but
I think it
weaponized
depends.
sermons. We're throwing arrows as pastors because we got the mic and we got the Bible, and
Sure,
we're
sure.
throwing arrows at people.
but I'm going, but okay, so, but you're taking things out of context here. So anyway, that's a whole nother conversation, I think, possibly.
Yeah, well,
But
weaponized.
it applies to this celebrity context of this green room mentality.
Well, it's just like other celebrities, right? If I step out of
Right.
line, what happens if I'm a celebrity and I step out of line and I say stuff that the other celebrities don't want me to say? I'm going to get pushback publicly. I'm going to have people tweeting at me. I'm going to have statements made. I'm going to have songs made about me, everything else. Well, it's the same thing. If I step out of line because I did something you didn't like, and because I'm on stage and I'm doing these things in celebrity culture and people know me, well, now this celebrity pastor has to stand up and use his sermon to diss me.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a diss track.
Correct.
It becomes a diss track at that point. So yes, and we will be doing an episode just on weaponized sermons. Okay, that is coming up. I'm trying to figure out how to do that nice. Every time I think about that one, I almost cuss. So we're not ready to do that one yet.
We could just replace words with words.
Yeah. No, I've already got a bleep out on this one, and it's not because I cuss. It's because I said a church name. First time in almost a year. All right, we're coming up on this episode will probably air after the year date. It may not, but we're like right now, as we're recording this, we're within a month of a year
That's amazing.
doing this
Wow.
podcast.
That's
That's the
amazing.
first time I've said a church
Well, so
name.
you should celebrate that. You've
Anyway.
done good. You've done good.
Yeah, so we'll bleep that out. I also had somebody ask recently, and this is off topic, but I'll say it real quick. We've had some people ask recently who are newer to the podcast, and they're like, "Hey, I'm sharing the podcast, but I'm scared to share it because it says it's explicit on Spotify and Apple." And they're like, "I haven't heard you cuss, but every episode says it's explicit, and I just don't want to share it with people for that reason. Like, can you? Is that a mistake?" And I have to tell them it's not a mistake. We said this really early on, but it's good for weeks. We've had so many new people come on board the podcast. We mark our episodes as explicit because we talk about often
Difficult.
trauma-based things,
Yeah.
difficult topics, triggering topics.
Sure.
And what we don't want is we don't want underage people, middle school kids, high school kids who are Christians to get one. We don't want them totally jaded to the church. They don't need to have these conversations, but also it's just an extra warning to let people think before they jump in. Even
They don't want to be
adults.
triggered or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
Because even though we're not explicit as far as we're just, cussing up a storm, right? What we are doing though is we're talking about things that sometimes you're going to have to turn the episode off. My wife is a therapist. She is a mental health professional. And it's like 2 or 3 episodes ago, which no one's going to know what that is because I don't know when this will actually air. But 2 or 3 episodes ago, she came home and she said, "I was listening to that episode today. It was really good, but I had to turn it off." She said it was way too triggering. I had to turn it
Yeah.
off. She said,
Mhm.
or take it in doses,
Yeah.
small parts.
Yeah, she said, "You gotta, you may want to give an extra big trigger warning on one like that next time." She said, "Because that one got me right."
Mhm.
And she's a mental health
Right,
professional.
right.
Okay. So
Mhm.
that's why, just if you have been asking, totally separate, it's why we put explicit there. Again, we're not trying to make waves. We're not trying to make people think we cuss a lot. We're not trying to cover anything up. We just want to make sure that people know these are adult and hard conversations. Okay.
Yeah.
And you're going to disagree about stuff like the celebrity culture thing. But how difficult is it? You're a semi-professional musician at this point when you're doing this, which you still are. Leann, you weren't.
Mhm.
But how did it feel the first time? Because they don't promote that. You don't know that right off the bat. How did it feel the first time you realized I'm sitting in a green room and a significant portion of these people are one, being paid, and two, they're not Christians and they're helping us lead in worship? Sometimes they're the front people in worship. How did that make you feel just as a person sitting in the green room when you came to that realization the very first time?
I think it makes you feel, I think it can go either way. It can go one of two ways. The first time probably makes you feel a little inadequate of either, hey, I don't feel worthy enough to be in the room with these people, right? They're obviously so much better than me. Why, I'm not worthy enough to be in this room or on the stage with these people. Or it's a feeling of, oh, do does leadership see me as worthy enough
They see me as a professional.
to be in this room with these people? Wow.
So do they see me as a
Special.
professional? They see me as a semi-celebrity.
And that was
musician.
enough to get you over that first time of, why are these other people all being paid for this and I'm not? It was oh, well, I should feel honored that they would ask me in the room with all these people.
And if you do ask the question, I'm going to throw this out there. You're going to get led in this direction. Well, we're having to pay them because we don't have enough people. You're doing the
Yes, you
more
do.
holy and
Mhm.
honoring thing because you're willing to serve without a
You're
paycheck.
answering the
And the
call.
Lord sees that. So now all of a sudden you're like, not only am I as talented as the professional musician, but I'm better because I'm doing it for the Lord.
Okay, well, so my reaction is different than yours, Leann, because I remember the first time there was some series and some theme to this series that they were getting ready to start. Probably a 4-week-long series at a church I was serving, and they decided to make this music video with a local person who is also in a cover band sing the song, who is not a Christian. And I know this for a fact. Because I live that world too. I know people in that world. And I'm sitting in the congregation because I'm not serving that weekend. And I'm like, my mouth is hung open. And I'm like, so I know how she is outside of this building. I know how she lives her life. And I'm not trying to judge. Okay.
Yeah, you're not judging her,
trying to
but
judge.
you're simply saying, but now she's essentially
she's-
leading the church service and worship.
She's on our screens in our church, and that's okay. But then I get criticized for, wait a minute. And then two,
I get criticized for singing in the same bars you just pulled her out of. and
Right.
paying her for.
and holding myself at a certain level of accountability. But we paid her, so it's fine. I mean, where's that? And then I also thought, well, I sing that same type of music, and I'm right here, and you wouldn't have had to pay me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would have
I'm
done
a
it out of volunteering heart.
believer in your
It
gathering.
wasn't about celebrity status. I'm not there to do it because to be on the video. I'm just saying you have a person who can do this, who's capable. I would think, and you wouldn't have had to pay me. So what is going on here? And then the other thing I would add is when I found out, just because of side conversations of people who were consistently serving, and here's where it really got me was one particular paid person was becoming a part of the church. I think was becoming a member of the church. So was Christian, but was getting paid consistently every time they served. And I'm like, why are they always getting paid, but the rest of us aren't? And when they show up to practice before our first service, they're never prepared to the level that I'm prepared. And I'm an unpaid. So, this inconsistency of it, you know what I'm saying? So expectation and excellence, and yet we're still going to give them pay, and you're expecting the same out of me, and I'm actually providing what you've asked me to do in my opinion, like I'm come prepared and I'm ready.
Well, and here's the reality.
And then I'm not getting paid.
Here's
See
the
what I'm
really
saying? So
uncomfortable reality, because you're okay not being paid. The uncomfortable reality is sometimes they made the choice to pay someone versus using a volunteer in the gathering because it wasn't even about excellence. Sometimes it was because we're paying someone because the way they look. Sometimes it's we're paying someone because they have just a little bit different of a look, a little bit different of a sound. But when excellence in worship becomes so much of an idol, and I'm calling it an idol, when it becomes so much of an idol that we are willing to pay unbelievers to come in and lead us in worship just because they're a hairbreadth more excellent or have a different look, then again, we're performing. That's not worship anymore. It's become a performance. And I think in a lot of churches, parishioners would be okay if they knew, oh, this is a performer. This isn't a church staff member or volunteer. This one's a paid performer, okay? Because then you could ask, how much are we paying for performers? Why do we pay for performers? Some people would be fine with it. I love it. We have great experiences. Keep paying the performers. But the same thing. So I'm going to throw this out there. This is a little different than it's not just celebrity, but it's a part of it. When you have celebrity pastors who feel the pressure, okay, or want to be celebrity pastors who feel the pressure, I've got to bring the best sermon I can every week. I've got to be this great speaker. So now I'm preaching a sermon that someone else wrote, whether it's an in-house writer or I bought it off of Sermon Central or this, that, or the other. I'm preaching the sermon someone else wrote. I'm preaching it almost word for word. I give no attribution, right? Well, I think more people than not would be okay with that if they knew, hey, this person on staff, they're not a pastor. They're not a teaching pastor. They're a performance teacher and they're a non-believer. But let's give credit. The sermon today was written by X person who's a believer, right? If we were more honest, some people wouldn't be that bothered. But most people expect, I think most believers that I've run into, they expect that the people who are leading me in worship are actually people who are worshiping.
Exactly.
And you can't worship God
No.
if you're not a believer in God. I think most people who go to churches expect that my preacher is preaching a sermon that they wrote, a sermon that God gave them for this time, right? I think it feels wrong. It feels like a bit of a bait and switch when you find out, no, this person is just performing a piece and reading a script that may be on a teleprompter behind them, or maybe it's on their iPad, but it's a script that they have that someone else wrote for them.
Well, and that's also why and again, this may sort of be another side conversation, but like I was always conflicted about doing secular songs in a church setting just because it started to become more of a, like, well, they said, well, you're reaching people who are unchurched, so you're making them feel comfortable.
Yeah. Okay.
But also, what does this in the end really have to do with what we're trying to do here?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it becomes performance and not worship.
Yep.
So that's a whole nother thing. But I wanted to, maybe I'm segueing too quickly on this or whatever, but I was sitting here thinking about the Green Moon Metalli more, and I was thinking another thing that I think is negative that it creates, which is sort of connected to all of this in a lot of ways, is it forms these cliques. There's lots of cliques happening within the room.
If you've seen Taylor Ransom's stuff, he does a lot of like meme videos and stuff like that about Christianity. He has a whole series about the green rooms and how the interns and the regular people are so excited when they finally get to sneak into a green room and stuff, because it does create cliques. There's only a certain few people who are allowed in the green rooms. And not only that, Vicki, there's different levels of green rooms.
Hey Disruptors, my name is Leann Reece, one of the hosts of the Church Disrupted podcast. If you have enjoyed what we're doing here on the podcast, we'd love for you to partner with us financially so that we can continue to help those who are healing, find community, and combat spiritual abuse. Whatever you can give, we are so grateful for your support.
There's different levels of green rooms.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was about to say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
the different.
I think I probably was in the pastor's green room once or twice in several years of serving.
Okay, so I'm not any better than y'all.
Mhm.
I'm not any better than y'all. Okay, and I wasn't any better than most of the other staff, but I could come in y'all's green room anytime I wanted.
Of course.
Right? I could grab the food. I could do any of that. I was at one point, and it got looser over time, but at one point I was one of the few people who could go into the fully secured, have regular clothes, plain clothes security and everything else.
Yeah,
I could go into
yes.
the pastor's green room.
Right, and get a
big
bottled
green room.
water.
Like I could even
Sacred
go in
water.
there. I could even go in there when most of the celebrity guest speakers were there. There was only a few that I got told I couldn't go like talk to, right? But it was such a thing. I remember, and I didn't realize it was such a thing because I was kind of on an inner circle, a little bit of a clique, and I didn't realize it was such a clique, you know. And I just kind of go places sometimes anyway. That's just my thing. Like I go to my kids have been different places, and they're like, "How did you meet that person at that concert?" Oh, I just went through that room, you know. And they're like, "You didn't have any credentials." I'm like, half of being there is acting like you belong, right? So I've always had that kind of personality anyway. But I remember kind of early on, I was at that church, and I wanted to find a place where I could come and be on site and have my quiet time and just spend some time with the Lord before I got started. I wanted to find a quiet place I could study because I was officing and allowed office other people. And I just started going to the pastor's green room on a regular basis. That's where I was having my quiet times, where I was studying. Some other people found out I was in there and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're in the green room. You're in pastor's green room. How are you in there? Is that okay?" And I'm like, why would it not be okay? But the reality is most people don't feel like they're allowed to be in that green room. And that green room, there are green rooms that have snacks and there are green rooms that have snacks. All right. Okay.
Yeah, you walk in, you're like, dang, they got all the good stuff in here.
Every green room has a TV, but in a lot of green rooms, the TV's just like tuned to like worship. And then in the other TV, like it's a big TV, it's tuned to whatever.
I'll have the
right?
game on.
Yeah, like exactly. Okay. So there's all kinds of things going on. There are levels to these green rooms. So when we talk about like green room, culture, green room mentality, it separates you based on how important am I? How much of a quote unquote celebrity am I based on which green room I can get into? Okay. And I've been in the green rooms, but I've only been in the green rooms at the little campuses, and they're like just little dingy green rooms. But if you've been in this green room, right, and it becomes something that it just feels like it separates people for no reason.
And even in the green room, you are separated sometimes from people. I mean, it's not funny, but it could be funny if like you were talking about this guy who does these videos on green room. I mean, there's the different personalities within the room. There's the one that sits in the corner and looks at their phone the entire time and never talks to anybody, and then gets up and like, "Oh, I'm gonna go play my guitar." I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Probably paid.
Maybe not always, but and then there's me flitting around, or in like I'm not awake yet and I just need coffee. I mean, it would be funny to sit here and think about the green room mentality.
But I think also it's, going back to that almost like treated like this holy place if, pastors have their specific green room. And so, funny story, one time my husband was on staff with us and he needed to get to his boss between services because it was important. And his boss was one of the pastor's sons. So where was this guy? In his dad's green room with him, right?
There are certain green rooms that only families allowed into. Let's be real.
So, our pastor had security, right? Backstage. And so my husband's like, "Hey, need to get to him. I'm on staff." And this
Here's my
security
staff
guy
badge.
was like,
I have credentials.
well, so he didn't have his
I'm a real
because he's
boy.
running around like a crazy person working, his 200th hour of the week. And so he's trying to get back there. He's like, "Hey, I need to talk to this person. I'm on staff, blah, blah, blah." And that guy was like a bouncer and was like, "Nope, absolutely not. I don't know who you are. You don't have your badge. You can't go in." And was like almost rude about it. And, my husband was even like, "Can you tell him I'm out here?"
Instead of just walking in the door and going, "Hey, this
Hey.
person's out here and says they're
Right.
here for you," is that
It's
Yes,
a little
but
pretentious.
it was like,
It's
it was
pretentious.
the president in there.
Yeah.
And he would have like body checked my husband trying
based
to
on some recent
talk to
events
him.
that might be better security than a president would receive?
Well, we're not going to go there.
I'm
But
not getting political. I'm just saying
No,
like that
I
is
know,
tight
it's
security.
Agreed.
But, it was this thing of why is this room like Fort Knox? Like, why isn't it
That's
a
where they
cupboard?
keep the holy water. Those bottles are expensive for a reason. There's
The
holy water.
anointed.
Yes.
I'm just kidding. There's not holy water.
But, it's like, why couldn't it have just been a conversation? to say, or why couldn't, my husband's boss have said, hey, wait, I'm waiting. Somebody's trying to look for me. Either let me go out there or tell the person outside, hey, this person's coming to look for me. Can you just let them in? I need to talk to them. It's about service.
Because I was back there all the time, could walk into that green room whenever I wanted. And I never had a staff badge.
Mm-hmm.
Never had a staff badge. But think about this. Y'all had to every time you walked on certain stages, you had to walk past the green rooms you weren't allowed in.
Yeah.
And watch people who were allowed in them
Yes.
walk out and sit on the same stage with you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting here thinking this entire time when you were talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting here also thinking about how even in smaller churches, this can happen. So we're not just talking about mega churches here, because I've had experience both. A pastor should be approachable. Now, I realize in a very large mega church or a very large church, that could be exhausting to a pastor to be so open that they are constantly approached by people. I get that. Okay,
Well,
but
it's a really hard job being a pastor,
Yeah.
being a shepherd. That's
Sure.
what a pastor is,
Sure.
because a shepherd has to get dirty with the sheep. So if you
Right.
have so many sheep that it's exhausting for you to care for them, you're caring for too many sheep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but separating yourself off into some special room that caters to you and your family and whatever is special people that are allowed in there. It removes you from the people that you are supposed to be shepherding, to your point. And so
You're not and at its worst, and I've seen pastors who, are only in it sometimes, right? But at its worst, what it does is it keeps those pastors from actually worshiping with the congregation. They don't know what's going on in the room. And this is many churches. This was that church too, but it's not just the church that we were at. It's many churches. It comes from Highlands. I think everybody's stolen these signs from Highlands. I think they let you print them off on their website. But it's there's a sign that's on stage
it's
before you walk on. I love the sign.
I love the sign too, but it could be. I don't know.
Yeah, I love the sign, but the sign gets used, I think, very inappropriately. But the sign is, "Thank you, God, for choosing me." I think it's like it's
Allowing
a blessing
me
to be on
this
the stage.
stage.
Yeah.
On being serving here
Yeah.
on the stage.
Thank you, God, for choosing me. It's an honor to be on this stage, right?
Mhm.
Which is 100% the right thought process.
Yes.
It just doesn't hit right when you watch someone walk past it who is telling you, look at that sign every time I put that sign up because
There for
it's an
you.
honor. God
It's an honor.
chose you to be on
You
that
can't
stage.
come in here.
It's an honor. And then you walk outside of the green room by your security that nobody else is allowed in, and you're looking at the sign. It's like, I don't think you got the point of the sign.
Right. Well, it's the same mentality of this person gets paid, but I don't. It's sort of that same thing. It's like, it's an honor though. It's an honor.
So a lot of times honor language and honor culture type stuff, honor language is used of, this is an honor. You're doing this to honor the Lord. Honor language is often used to keep you in your place.
Mhm.
You're asking
Mm.
questions. You're putting up boundaries. And a boundary may be something as simple as, hey, I'll serve 3 services, but no more. Or I'll serve 1 service, or I'll serve 1 day. If you have 5 services, I'll serve 5 services, but I'm not coming back a second day to serve 1 or 2 services, right? When you put up boundaries, or you push back, or you ask questions, then honor language gets used it is brought in to kind of control you in those celebrity type cultures.
And you're told
right?
to check your heart, because
Check
I
your
have
heart.
been told that before.
Yeah. I did check my heart before we had this conversation. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that's one of those things that the green room is different for how volunteers experience it, how staff members experience it, how gig workers experience it, how pastors experience it, how certain staffs experience it, how guest speakers experience it. And like, look, again, and I'll just use this as an example. I was allowed in the green room most of the time, but when there were certain special people visiting, it was like Fort Knox, and I wasn't allowed back there, either. Right. Because again, there was this special level of people and who was going on there. So all those things are not bad, but over time, what they do is they create this celebrity culture to where if you're on the stage at all, you're better than everybody else.
And you're unattainable.
If you're on the stage, you automatically become unapproachable. You're set apart at different levels. And the better you get, the more unapproachable you become. Also, I said earlier, and I thought I almost made a disclaimer because I thought some people were going to get mad at this. I called worship a gig. Early on in the podcast, I called it a gig, and I said, you're showing up, for this gig, to prepare for the gig. And I thought there's going to be people who are like, I can't believe he just called worship a gig. But then later on, we got into the conversation. Here's the reason why I called worship a gig. Because if you're paying some people who aren't even believers to come in to be a part of it,
It's a performance.
it's a gig.
Yep.
It's a gig. It's just
Yep.
some people are doing it to honor the Lord and some people are doing it for
Money.
a paycheck, right? And I'm not even against people fully being paid. The thing I'm most against there is no one should be leading us in worship who is not a believer,
Agreed.
right? Because I think when you start mixing the sacred and the secular like that, then it's like, what is real about this? People don't want, you can go get a great performance anywhere. My wife just got tickets, for her and my son to go to this huge concert that's coming to Neyland Stadium in Knoxville. And they're going to go get a great performance there. That's not what I want when I go to church. I want what that performance can never give me. That's the holy. That's the sacred.
That's sacred
right?
and true
So-
worship. Yeah.
As we're just thinking about, green rooms, a lot of people have a different take on the green rooms. We could say a lot more about green rooms. This was more about just how it causes that separatist celebrity type mentality. And the green room mentality is just that I'm separate, I'm special, I'm different, I'm on a different plane. And it leads to us being a little bit of divas, because you guys have seen this, right? You've also seen this where, hey, we are getting fed well in a green room and taken care of. And when it first happens, we're really excited about it. And then a few months later, we're dogging the snacks and we're dogging the meal because it wasn't our favorite. It wasn't quite as good. The ambiance wasn't quite as good. Something wasn't quite as good. So it's that diva-esque attitude of we come to expect this treatment.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah.
So, yes, going from that, like what we had, and then when we went to our next church, it took me a while to get started on worship again, but then I did, and it was a smaller church than we had been at, still a decent size, because you were there with us for a little while too. And once I joined that worship team, and I was like, okay, well, they'll have snacks or they'll have food because we got to be here early. Like, we need to be fed. Well, when it was just like packaged snacks and not like the full meals that because we would get full meals sometimes.
Certain
So
camps
like,
with full breakfast.
wasn't
sure.
catered.
yeah, like full,
No.
this wasn't catered.
No,
Or
this
if it-
was
or if-
volunteers making our food for us,
Yeah.
home cooked meals, which is wonderful.
But then when I went to this church and got started on worship, and it was prepackaged muffins or things like that, or there was some fruit here or there, my first thought was like, oh man, there's like no food. What am I supposed to do? It's just snacks. And it was that like I had been taught to expect this buffet, fresh buffet every weekend, and I was ticked off because I had to eat a prepackaged muffin and was like, but I want breakfast. I'm hungry. I'm on worship all day.
I had the same experience just going from campus to campus at times.
You get your stale muffin out of here, okay?
And
Do you
I'm
know
like-
who I
you're like,
am?
I can't-
I am Leann
listen,
Reece. People know me when I walk into restaurants.
I would remember being like, yes, I get to serve at this campus because the breakfast is always on point. Yes.
You don't have to pay me. Just let me get in the good green room with the good.
Yes, I want the breakfast.
That was your first thought when you got scheduled at that
You're like,
church.
yes,
was
the
like,
breakfast.
oh, the breakfast isn't as great at this one, but at least there's food.
Yeah.
So, but it was this like humbling, like, whoa. I can get my butt up a little early and either
bring
make my own or,
breakfast.
run by Starbucks and get what I want.
I don't have a green room or any of that. I just eat before I go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Instead
what-
of being like, wait, what am I here for? But what had I been conditioned to expect?
Yeah.
For me, giving up my time, well, at least I should get a full breakfast.
And that's where, and again, that's the green room mentality. Would you have called yourself a celebrity? No. Right? But in that moment, that green room mentality caused you to act a little bit like a celebrity. Like, come on, what are we doing here? Are we even worshiping the Lord if we don't have a home cooked breakfast?
We don't have eggs and bacon.
Yes, right. When what that church was doing was actually really good. They were saying, hey, you're going to be here. We're going to provide you with something, but we're trying to be like really judicial with tithe money and not asking people to, is out of all the volunteers we have and the volunteer needs we have, is the role we really need to ask people to do cooking for you guys for
Right,
two
right.
services, right?
Well, but in defense of that too, though, because you're serving sometimes so much, you're not eating very well, and so I think I started getting a little particular about what I was getting because you'd go if it was at night or something, and you'd go and there'd be like Chick-fil-A nuggets and Chick-fil-A sandwiches, and there was not even a side offered. Like where, I mean, like, where chips? Well, it's not healthy, but maybe a salad. Salad would be good. Like
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying. Like you started criticizing the food because you were just like,
And
this is all the food I
that's not
have
even
time
just
for.
because of your expectation.
No.
But
It's
the
because
gr-
what have I had time
But
for?
the green room mentality is I have to stay here all day, so I expect
gotta-
to be
and I've gotta
treated
drive.
well.
And so I don't have time. I'm
Which-
already, in it. Yeah, it's
And that goes back to volunteer exploitation, though. You were there
Yeah.
so long that you
Yeah.
couldn't do anything else. So again, there's a tension in all of this. We talk about it tongue in cheek, but there's a tension in all of this. But again, where it leads to it the most is there are pastors that are unapproachable. We treat them like celebrities. And again, we had Laura Barringer on the podcast, months ago, and she said the first time, she was at Willow Creek, and she said the first time that I met Bill Hybels, it was like the paparazzi taking pictures. I got him to sign something. I got to take a picture with him. And she said, my husband said he's just a pastor. He's not a celebrity. And she goes, no, he's a celebrity. Right. And because that's what it's become.
Mhm.
Right. That looks so different from Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It looks so different from the way that he acted. It looks so different from his followers, where he said, hey, we'll eat what people give us where we go.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have any expectation. Right. So it's not bad to have a green room to try to care for your volunteers, but we got to be very, very careful that we're not exploiting people. We got to be very careful that we're not causing separate communities and cliques to form. We got to be very careful that we're not causing people to become unapproachable, even volunteers, not just church staff, but even volunteers. And I think there's real conversations that we got to have. I think some parishioners are going to be okay with having paid musicians because excellence matters to them. I think the greater question than paid musicians is, are they believers? But anytime you have paid musicians, you are always going to have the inequity and inequality where you have people who say, hey, I was fine volunteering, but it just hits me wrong that you're paying these people now, right? But I'll say this is something that came up from the conversation. I think it's a good place to kind of end on and land the plane. I think it's only fair that as a parishioner, does my church pay musicians or not? Right? I think that's fair. And it goes back to churches. Are we just being honest about this? Are we being honest about these kind of things? Are we being forthright? Because if we're being forthright and people know there's nothing to hide, but especially when we're even like hiding some of those things, it causes, I think, even more of that celebrity type culture. So anyway, as we get ready to land the plane fully on this podcast, is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners, just as they're processing what we talked about, they're thinking about green room mentalities and cultures, the good, the bad, the ugly? Anything you want to leave them with?
I would say that in the end, I think, the green room is not necessarily a bad thing as a whole if you find balance. Make sure that the people are taken care of appropriately. Like to your point, not treated like a celebrity and separated, but yet not exploited and feeling like they can't ever leave the room. I mean, there's just got to like be cognizant of what is happening instead of just allowing things to just naturally occur, because again you're setting up things for division and cliques and the wrong mindset.
I think, circling back to the fact of, yeah, we've seen a lot of the bad and the chaos or the conditioning it can leave. The green rooms can. But I would say if you're looking to be a part of a team or you're on a team that has a green room, ask some questions, especially if you're going to be new to that team. Hey, what is the green room for? What is your vision for it? Kind of what is the expectation, in this room? Because, there was one place where it was like, yeah, stay in there, do whatever you want, hide, don't talk to people, whatever. And then another one where it was like, hey, come in here, take your break, take your 5 minutes, grab a snack, and then go sit in service. Even if it's multiple times, go sit in service. Let people see you not only on stage, but in the room, listening and, also given that permission to, hey, if you can't go back on stage because you need to be down there worshiping or you need to be down there for prayer, do that. So ask questions. What does the green room look like? What is it for? Is it accessible? Ask questions because we've seen the good and the bad. And I think not only for your worship team, or other volunteers that are on the stage, but a pastor does need sometimes 5 minutes. Does he probably have an office? Yeah, maybe that office is kind of far away and he needs something close by just for like 5 minutes to regroup and then go out and be with the people.
Regroup, look at his notes. That's not the place where you study for 30 minutes because you weren't prepared, though.
Yeah, and it's not the place that when you're not on stage, you're in there being guarded, And so, because I've also seen that where the pastor's like, look, this isn't my green room, but this is an extra room. Like, if we do have speakers who need a few minutes, or if I need a few minutes, something's on my heart, I need to go and close the door and be alone. That's fine. And that's what it was used for. That's great. That's not only a pastor showing how to take care of yourself, but
There's a difference between a prayer closet and a green room, and
Yes.
one sounds more like a prayer closet.
Yes. And so, leading that from the top down of like, it's okay to take your 5 minutes. But after you're done, don't abuse that. Don't, it's not a hangout spot. It is a regroup moment. It's a take a breath moment, and then go out there and be the hands and feet. When you're ready, do that. And so ask questions. Don't judge a church just because they have one. Ask questions, be open-minded, have an open heart. And also, if you feel like a green room is being exploited or being used for the wrong reasons, be an example. Say, hey, yeah, I'm coming in here. I'm going to grab something to eat. I will talk to everybody for a minute, but hey, guys, guess what? I'm going to go sit out in service. Y'all want to come with me? Like, let's go do that.
That's what I do when I speak places. If they offer me a green room, I will put my stuff in it, but I let them know I'm not going to be in it, and I'm not in it until I go to pick up my stuff when I leave, right? Because it's just setting an example. I think my final word, about all this is really just about the volunteer side of it. If volunteers are having to serve more than 2 services to the point where they need a green room, okay, then we're probably doing too much, because God hasn't sent us enough volunteers yet, or we haven't discipled enough people who can volunteer and use those giftings to do what we're trying to do. So I would just get you to think, if you're having to use those green rooms because you have volunteers serving at so many services, you're doing so many services, are we trying to get ahead of what God is doing? Because we can get ahead of what God is doing and calling us to, and we can have 8 services because we know it leads to growth in numbers. But if we aren't discipling people, and God hasn't sent us the people to actually do that without burning people out, then maybe we got ahead of him. Maybe we shouldn't be doing it. So again, if we think about volunteer care and caring for people, and we think about people as being sheep of the good shepherd, the bride of Christ before anything else, then I think we would say a greater way to care for them rather than a green room is to give them boundaries and protect them from serving too much, right? So that would just be my thought. I know a lot of people are going to disagree, but we're a little over time on this podcast, so we're going to land the plane there. So grateful for you guys that are listening today. I hope this has challenged you. I hope something's encouraged you. I hope something's made you laugh. I know all 3 of those things have happened with me. I appreciate you guys, Vicki, Leann. Thanks for joining us today. But we love you guys. We're praying for you. And until the next time, grace and peace. We'll see you on the next episode of the Church Disrupted podcast.